Hello and welcome to Oddball Book Reviews. Today we're going to be going over the Earth arc in He Who Fights with Monsters. Essentially, the last arc ended with Jason Asano dying, something that is kind of his thing. Anyway, he is reincarnated, or not reincarnated, it's uh, brought back to life, I guess, on Earth instead of Palimustis. And he starts bringing magic to his world. At first, it's actually really great. I mean, just seeing Asano come to Earth, find out that there is actually magic on Earth, that there's this whole secret society and everything, and the interplay of the politics. And then, of course, he brings his own brand of magic, and he kind of kicks ass, because he's actually far better than the Earth magicians, you might call them. Anyway, uh, but the further along it goes, kind of the worse it gets. Like it becomes more depressing, and Jason Asano stops being Jason Asano, for lack of a better word. He starts becoming much more serious, and the things that he has to do becomes worse and worse. And the first book itself, like it starts out really strong, but I feel like it really hits that territory. And each of the books do have their own good parts, but they are far more overshadowed by the bad parts. And honestly, if the next few books hadn't already been out, I probably would have given up at this point because it just did not feel as good as the last arc. Like Jason Asano just didn't feel like himself anymore. And the further we got, the worse it got, and the worse the politics of the earth was, and the more terrible the destruction being caused was, the more people were dying, and it was weighing way more heavily on his conscience. And he has his whole family there, and in the end they choose not to go with him because he's not the person he used to be. And that's from their perspective. From the reader's perspective, it definitely isn't the character that we fell in love with in the first three books. Anyway, it does eventually end, and going back to Palimustis, it's a lot better. But throughout this whole first, uh, or the whole Earth arc, it is kind of annoying, I guess. Like how much different it is, how much different it feels. I'm being really negative on this one, but don't get me wrong, it is worth reading. It's just not as good, not as many good things to say about it. In the last arc, I liked the politics because it was interesting, and watching, Jason Asano insert himself into it, being himself, and just shirking authority at every turn. On Earth, he kind of does it too, but it's just more negative, and the politics just suck. Like the interplay between the different factions and the governments and everything. It just, I don't know. I think he had a negative view. The author had a negative view of Earth politics, so he spun Earth politics in this extremely badly. Anyway, I don't know what it was. It just wasn't that great. Which meant that, now you're left with the battles, which honestly, the battles don't feel any better than the last one. As I said in the last video, it's because of the powers and such, and how he describes the powers all the time. And every time he, describes the powers, it kind of puts a halt to the battle. It becomes monotonous to go through some of these battles, especially when you really don't care. You're not really invested in whether he kills another monster or whatever. It becomes just I wouldn't call it a slog necessarily. It's interesting, but it's almost boring. And without the political part of it, making it more interesting for me, the battle part didn't really make it much more interesting for me. As I said, I probably would have given this whole series, or the rest of the series, a miss if they uh, the rest of the books weren't already out, and I wasn't looking forward to him getting back to Palamastus. Um, anyway, I think we'll just go ahead and get on with the weird meter. Not much else to say about this one. As far as weird, yeah, I'd almost give it a 5, maybe a 5.5. I'm not even sure of that. It's kind of hits the middle of the road. It's got its own weirdness, but it's almost bog standard for an urban fantasy, because this is essentially what it turns into instead of a isekai or a lit RPG. It's almost a bog standard uh, urban fantasy with vampires and such. Which, yes, it has vampires, and uh, yeah, the weird parts of it, there aren't that many. But anyway, so it gets a pretty average view on that. As far as overall, I might give it a 6 out of 10. It's worth reading. I will say that, especially to get on to the rest of it. I think the series as a whole is very good, but this arc of it uh, was hard to get through, I think. Anyway, that's about all I have to say about this one. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm LW Greenwood, and stay odd, people.